In this video, I thought it would take a few minutes to introduce you to the, I guess, admittedly curious approach that we'll take in this course in our evaluation of religions and religiosity. It's called the critical academic approach. I say somewhat curious because it's not an approach that people use in their everyday lives. I mean, generally speaking, sadly, I think people tend not to think very much about their religion. They certainly tend not to be very critical regarding their religion, and they should be, just as they're critical regarding anything else. Why not religion? So what are some characteristics of this approach? Well, first of all, the perspective is generally agnostic. Now, of course, I'm not saying a person has to be an agnostic to do this kind of study, or you have to accept agnosticism. That's not my point. I'm just saying the approach is sort of grounded on an agnostic kind of philosophy. Agnosticism is simply the idea that the individual will neither accept nor reject the existence of God. Another way to look at it is agnosticism is simply the sort of position that we just don't know. Gnosis is from the Greek word to know, and of course you put an A in front of it, you get to not know. So it really, to be honest, I think it's just a very honest, sincere, ingenuous approach to religion, because frankly, we're all human, and one might argue that technically we're all agnostic, since no human knows with a capital K. Anyway, so that's part of the approach. We'll talk more about that later. Also, too, it adopts the perspective of cultural relativism, the general idea that no one culture or religion serves as the standard by which others are judged. After all, if you're going to engage in a productive, fruitful study of world religions, religions from a global perspective, you can't begin that study by privileging one particular religion over the others, particularly since you really can't make a good, sound argument for the fact that, let's say, any one religion, quote unquote, is better than any other. There are 10,500 religions out there, and for the most part, all of the worshipers of all of those 10,500 different religions all seem to be equally happy and fairly satisfied with their faith. So cultural relativism, again, is just another fruitful, productive sort of perspective to adopt, to apply to the study of religions. Another point, religions are looked at as being primarily functional more than anything else. They're finely tuned to a particular matrix of historical accident, dietary preferences, language, customs, etc. So in other words, they're very, very much tied to the culture that produced them. And so for that reason, they tend to be quite functional in their given context. So that's important. So let's keep that in mind. Also, too, this approach is objective. As best we can, we apply the strict, rigorous standards of the scientific method and the way we come to know things scientifically. Of course, for a claim to be objective in simple terms, it means it's testable and publicly verifiable. So we're going to have a pretty high standard for knowledge and reason in this course. Now, as you can tell so far, this is not a theology course, because theology focuses almost exclusively on Western monotheistic worship, and even then almost primarily Christianity. Of course, that is certainly not what the academic approach to religions does. It's a global, as I said earlier, it's more of a global sort of approach to religions. Theology is a fascinating, totally appropriate subject. That's not the problem. The point is that this is just something else, which is good. It's another, quote unquote, another country heard from, as one writer once said. Also, too, quite clearly, that this is not, quote unquote, a Sunday school approach. I mean, that should be obvious by now. You know, every religion has their, quote unquote, Sunday school approach. I mean, I'm not saying that derisively. I'm just saying that to represent a certain kind of thinking. It's every religion has its cheerleaders that will extol the virtues of their religion vis-a-vis or at the expense of others. But clearly, that's not what we're doing here. So what you need to do when you're going through the materials, especially when it comes to writing your assignments, taking your exams, etc., you need to do the best you can to shelve your biases. So I guess in short, I'm asking you to become more anthropological, more a citizen of the world. If it's possible, imagine you're an anthropologist from Mars studying the cultures of planet Earth, something like that. And so, for example, and I want to get to this right at the beginning to keep me from having to repeat it throughout the semester. If you see a question regarding, oh, I don't know, let's say the existence of God is something we're going to take on. That's a classical discussion that's been going on forever, even in seminaries around the world. That discussion has been going on for ages. It's a fascinating discussion. So if the question is the existence of God, in this course, you will never ever start out your answer like this. Quote, well, as a Christian, I believe that, etc. That is precisely what you should not do. What I want is well-reasoned, rational, and to the extent you can, data-based arguments. The way you were raised and who you were raised by, if you think about it, is irrelevant and immaterial when it comes to producing data and evidence. Now, if you have data, evidence, sound argument to bring to bear on your position, well, then that's what I want to hear, and that's fine. So please understand, I have no issue with what your religious affiliation may be or whether or not you're religious. Is totally immaterial. I just need you to make a good sound argument. You see the point? So as best you can, please try to avoid that line of argument, because really that's not an argument at all. You're basically telling me, as I said earlier, who raised you and what you were taught. Well, that doesn't constitute an argument. Okay? So keep that in mind. All right, so I thought I would take just a second and look at the topics we're going to be covering in the course. There are 7 different modules. The first one is an introduction to the academic study of religion. I'm going to be talking about a lot of the things I'm talking about now, but in a bit more formal, expanded way. And you can see the different topics we'll be covering there. Also, too, I'm going to cover a handful of important terms. Some of them you may be familiar with, many of them you probably aren't. In Module 2, we're going to talk about the sources of religious knowledge, because that's important. Often, it will, once you critically look at why you have the beliefs you have, it will really make you reassess your faith and where you think you actually stand in regard to true knowledge. So this is always a good thing. So what are the sources of religious knowledge? Are they reliable? Are they not reliable? So we're going to talk about that. And then also in Module 2, religious pluralism, which has always been an issue. It's, for ages, Christianity in the Western world has been exclusivist. It's not any longer in general. And many religions have their sort of fundamentalist sort of perspective, meaning that there's one right way to deal with uncertainty and mortality and one right way to have a relationship with the transcendent. Some people call it God. Hindus call it Brahman. But the primary problem that arises there is that, well, then what about the other 10,499 ways of dealing with uncertainty and death and having a relationship with the Absolute? So we're going to talk about that issue under the heading Religious Pluralism. Module 3, we're going to do a little mini unit on world religions, just enough to introduce you to the religions of the world. We're primarily going to focus on the 11 quote-unquote great or world religions. You can see that we're going to focus, there's a special focus on Buddhism, which is my choice to represent Eastern religions, and then Islam, and then Christianity. We'll do a little unit on Christianity, talk a little bit about the history of Christianity. I think you'll find that discussion quite interesting. Module 4, philosophical/theological issues. Here we're going to take on some issues that are generally found in a philosophy of religion course. So you can see we're going to talk about belief, doubt, knowledge. What does it mean to have belief in something? Can you defend a belief in something? What about doubt? Is doubt reasonable when it comes to belief? Is doubt reasonable when it comes to knowledge? You see, we're going to talk about faith versus reason, two very different ways of relating to our world. And then the problem with faith. There are issues with faith because even some of the greatest Christian theologians that have ever lived, for example, C.S. Lewis and Soren Kierkegaard, both of whom we're going to discuss, have serious issues with the notion of faith. So it's not just critics, but it's also some of the great religious thinkers have had problems with the idea of faith, and we're going to talk about that. Module 5, the existence of God. Again, another classical issue that's been discussed down through the ages. Letter A, the design argument. That is probably the most popular argument for the existence of God. It's what lies at the foundation of what's called creationism and intelligent design. And we're also going to talk about something called the anthropic principle, the notion that the universe is fine-tuned for the existence of humans. That argument may seem to be inherently logical, but actually it's nothing of the sort. There are very serious problems with that argument, and we're going to probe that. Letter B, the problem of evil. Many people find the problem of evil to be the most important barrier that keeps them from accepting the existence of a personal, caring, loving God. And again, this is an issue that's been discussed for ages. I think you'll find that discussion interesting. And then there's a great video I found, a BBC documentary video, The Big Question, Is There a God? I think you'll really enjoy it. I just screened it this morning for the first time, and I think you'll enjoy that discussion. Module 6, paranormal phenomenon and the existence of the supernatural. Well, of course, without paranormal phenomenon and the purported existence of the supernatural, there really is no religion. Certainly not the way we understand religion. So this is quite relevant to a religions course like this. Of course, by paranormal, we're referring to events and so forth that occur in this world, but they lie just beyond the normal. They seem to be just beyond our grasp. But then, of course, the supernatural, now that's the idea that there is a totally different realm, the realm of the gods and angels and so forth, and demons, so to speak, that lies quite apart from the mundane, quotidian, empirical world we live in. And that's a very problematic assumption to make. And we're going to talk about why that assumption is problematic. And then you can see we're also going to talk about some cool things like exorcism and spirit possession and psychics and things of that nature. And then Module 7, religion and existentialism. Existentialism has to do with questions of individualism and individuals in the world. What is our place in the world? Is there meaning and purpose? Should we accept the meaning and purpose that's given to us at birth? Or should we maybe craft our own meaning and purpose? Those sorts of issues. And you can see we're going to talk about two existentialists. One is a Christian existentialist, Soren Kierkegaard. The other is an atheistic existentialist, Jean-Paul Sartre. And then you can see we're going to talk about death. Very, very important discussion when it comes to religion. And we're going to read a really interesting book by the French existentialist Albert Camus. Please note, however, it's a very, very short paperback novel. You can read it almost in a couple of afternoons. So I just want to let you know I wasn't loading you down with too much work there. Okay, well, that's it for the discussion of the sort of perspective that you need to have in this class, and something about the content that we're going to be covering in this course.